Great, thank you. Well, so welcome again, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Housing is Not Linear. This is a part of the California Newcomers Project, our learning and support series for providers. As you know, if you've joined us before, this session is hosted by Solvera. And we are doing this in partnership with CDSS and the Refugee Programs Bureau, and we're really glad that you were able to join us this morning. Before we dive in, I wanted to briefly share about Solvera. I'm Carissa. I'm an associate consultant with Solvera, and I have some other teammates who are joining us today, as well, Megan Bailey, and I believe my other coworker, Carrie Ham, might be on the call as well. But we're Solvera. We partner with agencies and systems to strengthen services and support frontline staff like you who are doing really complex work. Our approach is grounded in that collaboration, curiosity, and practical learning that's meant to be useful in real world settings, i.e., this housing conversation that we're going to be facilitating today. So, as I've said a little bit already, this session is part of the California Newcomers Project. And I wanted to pause here really quick to name something that is really important to this series and important to Solvera. The topics that we discuss in this learning series are topics that come directly from the community. So you joining this call and giving us feedback and suggesting ideas are how we get the topics for the learning series. So through the conversations with you, through interviews, listening sessions, the feedback surveys, and ongoing technical assistance, we learn what you actually want to hear about. And housing has been something requested over and over and over again because we know it's a complex thing. And we are so glad that we have some great guest speakers today to help facilitate that conversation. So if you've ever filled out a survey, if you've ever chatted with us and given ideas, just know that the webinars that we do are a direct result of that. So thank you for sharing your feedback. And I encourage you today to also be sure to fill out the feedback survey. So apologies, all of a sudden my mouse just died. So I am going to adjust something really quick, but now I will be able to move things. Okay, so as you know, the webinar is one of the several ways that you can participate in the California Newcomer Project, and that is where you're at today on number 2. But you can also complete surveys that we have, join us for listening sessions, schedule an interview with us, and request additional calls or trainings. So there's a lot of ways to engage in this project, and I just wanted to shout out that you are also participating in and by being here today and being willing to learn with us. Today, as we mentioned, our topic is on housing. We titled it Housing is Not Linear because we know it's not a one size fits all. It's not a straight do this, do this, do this, and it's going to work out. It's housing is something that it ebbs and flows and it's complicated. And so today we wanted to make sure we acknowledge that and um, and really be have reality around the conversation about housing. You can see the learning goals off to the side. So we will have our guest speakers walk us through all those things. And as we mentioned, this is a series. So our next webinar is going to be in June, on June 18th, and it's going to be Motivational Interviewing 201. And if you attended our first motivational interviewing webinar, we had an incredible guest facilitator, Megan Bailey, who will be returning for that webinar as well. Some important reminders that we like to say. So please stay muted unless you are called on to speak, or if we open up the floor for Q&A, you can do a live question with your voice. You can also submit questions using the Q&A feature as well. So that is accessible for you. So you can put your questions in there, and then you can also upvote those questions. So if you see someone's question, you're like, that's my question as well. I want that to be answered. You can upvote it as well. You can put questions in the chat as well, so that our guest facilitators and their teams can see what you're asking and can respond periodically. But we will have time at the end of the session for a dedicated Q&A time. And we will be using quite a bit of Zoom polls. So We would really appreciate your engagement with those Zoom polls and the chat. So, just a heads up, and they are anonymous. So, it's just for us to be able to learn quickly as we're giving information and to gather some data as well. And then finally, if you are media, we ask for you to go ahead and hop off because this webinar is dedicated for those who are directly engaging with the ORR community. All right, our first Zoom poll. Megan, if you'll launch our welcome poll, that would be great. All right, this welcome poll is just our standard one we use for each webinar. So we have two questions just so we can know where are you joining from and how long you've been working in the resettlement field. Already seeing quite a, ooh, we're almost at 50% of responses already. Love that. About 30 more seconds. All right. 10 more seconds. Would love for everyone to answer these two questions quickly. That'd be so great. It looks like so far we're having the most people join us from San Diego this morning. And as usual, it's typically is evenly split among the amount of years pretty much that people have been in resettlement. So that is always interesting to gather that information. So thank you for participating in that poll. Okay. And as always, we'd like to make sure that we share some expectations so that we are all on the same page for our learning today. We will be focusing on the housing landscape. We'll be talking about common barriers, practical strategies, and RPB supports and collaborations so specific for California. We won't be able to cover individual cases today. We won't be problem solving for like real-time placements either. And obviously, we can't cover all housing solutions. This again, because housing is not a one size fits all. And we won't be able to do crisis situations in this call today. And then remember on the right, we like to remember that we want to embrace curiosity. We want to share what's working and what's not. We want to ground the conversation in mutual respect. And we also still want to make sure we acknowledge the current environment because it's hard, it's ever changing, and we do acknowledge that. So we know this is a complex space. So the more that we can learn from each other, the better. And that's why I'm so glad that you are with us today. Again, we're going to be going over quite a bit today. We have our housing landscape, strategies and solutions, and then we'll talk about some application and next steps. And in that time, we'll have our Q&A. And I'm so excited as I'll get to introduce our first guest facilitator. All right. So we have a really strong group of speakers today, and I am excited to kick us off by introducing our first speaker. Lindsay, she leads the housing solutions and strategy at Church World Service, and she brings over 15 years of experience working across housing, economic stability, and refugee resettlement at the local, national, and even global level. She also leads Refugee Housing Solutions, and many of you might be familiar with that, with Refugee Housing Solutions already, but if not, you're going to be in for such a treat because they are so, they have so many resources for us. They support providers across the country in navigating housing challenges and expanding access for newcomers. What I really appreciate about Lindsay's work is how grounded it is. She brings both the big picture perspective and very practical on the ground strategies that providers can actually use. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay to walk us through the national housing landscape and some key strategies.
Yeah, thank you so much for that very kind introduction. I am thrilled to be with you all. California is very near and dear to my heart. I lived there for several years, so working on affordable housing challenges, opportunities. So just thrilled to be with you all. So as Carissa mentioned, this is housing is not linear. And so I thought you can go to the next slide. I could just kind of give you an overview of where we're headed for my portion of today's discussion is really
Oh,
just helping you understand who Refugee Housing Solutions is, our role, and in supporting housing strategies. I don't think the slide is
sorry.
showing right now.
I apologize for that.
No, that's
My
okay.
mouse, I'm telling you, but you did get to see my dog, hopefully, so I hope that was fun.
Yes.
Okay, back to you, Lindsay.
No, totally fine. But yeah, and kind of explain, right? Like the US housing market, you all are probably very familiar with it, but I thought it might be helpful just to give some updated statistics and overview, highlight, this is all great information, but highlight what does this look like, best practices locally, and how can we apply some of this information, and then just provide a myriad of resources and opportunities through RHS. So you can move to the next slide, and I'll just share briefly who we are and what we do. The RHS team really leverages experience in affordable housing, refugee resettlement strategy, communications, and really with the mission and aim to increase access to dignified, affordable housing for refugees and other newcomers in the United States. And we do this through a myriad of ways. You can go to the next slide, and it's just a brief snapshot of our team. As I mentioned, some of the different skill sets we have and cross-sector skills expertise to facilitate dialogue as it relates to housing, increasing access to affordable housing. So the next slide kind of gives you a nice graphic of how we do it in a really little beautiful housing graphics. So we facilitate dialogue, right? As I mentioned, we are a team of dedicated housing and resettlement experts that support folks like you all across the entire country with really complex housing needs of newcomers, promoting collaboration, partnerships, bringing folks from both the housing space and the resettlement space, the private landscape, all kind of to the table of how do we work together on some of these perhaps some of the most complex issues that folks are facing, whether it's displacement related to many different things, but then also trying to secure some affordable housing, as we know that that leads to economic stability, right? Catalyzing housing innovation. So we have various innovative housing pilots that we are exploring. And when we say innovative, I'll go into that a bit later. It doesn't always mean out of the box. It might just be adapting a best practice and sharing those with our constituents, and then expanding information sharing, knowledge sharing. Historically, we offered a good deal of technical assistance, though we're not currently doing that, but our team has a lot of the know-how and expertise in that space. And we have over 240 plus multimedia resources on our website. So I say all that to kind of frame who we are and what we do. But the next slide really just shares that we are big believers in ensuring that we are creating data-informed programming, right? And so we launched in late 2021 and then publicly launched early 2022. And a lot of our work is surveying the network. So since 2023, we've surveyed over 635 constituents nationwide. We have all 50 states represented, resettlement agencies, CBOs, ECBOs, right? So housing stakeholders, we want to ensure that the programming and the solutions we're proposing are based on qualitative and quantitative data. And also research. So the next slide gives you just a high level overview, right, of some of the US housing realities. And on the slide deck, there's various links to where you can read more about this. But the National Low Income Housing Coalition puts out a good deal of reports each year and on the national shortage of affordable rental housing. And currently, the US has a shortage of 7.2 million rental homes, affordable and available to renters with extremely low income. And so what we're seeing, right, is there's many reasons for this, but there's just a lack of affordable housing, a lack of available housing, As you know, working with some of the newcomer populations, we are there's times where temporary housing is critical or really um, large houses to accommodate all of the members of the family and making sure that you have staff that understand these market challenges while also serving the community. So the next slide just kind of gives that high level overview of a few factors. This is not conclusive, but just
And
a few
sorry,
factors.
Lindsay,
Yeah.
just to interrupt real quick, we just have two quick polls that we'd love to gather some really quick information. So, Megan, if you'll launch poll number two, that would be great. And then we can kind of see how who has dedicated housing roles at their agencies. And okay, we're seeing people put in answers. Right now, it's looking like seven. Maybe you can already see the answers on the screen accidentally. But if you can't, I will, there we go. So 63% so far have dedicated agencies. So thank you so much. And then Megan, if you'll launch poll number three, what feels challenging right now? As Lindsay was just going over the reality of housing and the reality of everything that's going on and what are the crucial things that drive the housing crisis. We wanted to hear too, what feels the most challenging for you right now? We're seeing finding initial housing placements, navigating landlord requirements is a big one, limited local resources. Okay. Yeah, so the top three that are coming in right now, Lindsay, are the finding the initial placements and navigating landlord requirements. All right.
Well,
Thank you.
that is very much in line with what we're seeing nationally as well. I'm so glad that y'all are contributing to the poll. It's incredibly helpful data as we're building out cases, building out resources, and really just working to ensure everyone is understanding of the realities that folks are facing, right? So we have the affordability challenges like the landlord, right? But some factors that are actually really driving that US housing crisis are the lack of supply, the affordability, the reality of like interest rates and zoning and lack of funding, right? And then just housing costs is surpassing income growth. And that's a real reality right now, and especially true right in California. And I think some of my colleagues in California who are co-presenting today will be able to share some of those numbers when it comes to like the local content of California. So if you go to the next slide, I wanted to provide just some high level data and content that we would recommend, as you're having these conversations. RHS has created a ton of resources, some academic based, some really practical, which we'll talk about, like landlord tenant relationships, the benefits of renting to newcomers, right? And so my colleagues throughout the conversation and when we open it up for Q&A, we'll be able to drop some really relevant content, hopefully, to you all. But some data, really recent data we published, I believe, back in March of 2026, as we just did this research-based kind of study of housing stability being critical to achieving positive economic impact on local communities, right? And so a good deal of studies, such as the one cited here, really discuss that housing is key to reducing intergenerational poverty and increasing economic mobility, right? It's a social determinant of health. And so we know that it confirms it really is the basis and foundation for a lot of other areas of self-sufficiency. And on the next slide, you'll see that data also confirms newcomers contribute significantly to safer and stronger communities through housing stability. One article, I believe it was the American Immigration Council, it stated that in one study, for every 1,000 immigrants settling in a county, 250 US born individuals tend to follow because they're drawn by this increased economic opportunity. And Other studies here, as you can see, that were done state how much newcomers really do contribute to communities, and so it's really impactful data. So that somewhat frames some of the national realities. And then on the next slide, I think this kind of goes back to that poll, which I'm so glad to see that it is unfortunate, but it is trending, and that these are the realities nationally and local, right? But RHS we conduct annual surveys, and in 2025, we conducted a survey to the entire like resettlement content, ECBOs, CBOs, and one of the questions really asked like, what are some of those top challenges that folks are experiencing when they're engaging with landlords? Um, and one of the top challenges was noted language, and just underscores the critical nature of local staff engagement, and managing landlord relationships really proves critical to mitigating, right, like housing challenges, creating opportunity. And we know there's a lot of other unique um, perhaps challenges or opportunities, if you will, of ways that we can mitigate some potential challenges and create opportunity. And I believe the folks from California will talk a bit more about that. But just to highlight, right, sometimes there's just a lack of or a misunderstanding on folks may not have rental history in the US. And so different components, and RHS has a great deal of content on ways that you may be able to have some of those conversations. I wanted to just kind of, now that we've talked nationally, bring it back down to what does this look like? I'm a case manager, I'm at the case level, a program level strategy, and then agency level and national tools, right? So, what does this mean if you're frontline staff and what do clients need the most, right? And so what we've seen is this housing informed case management, really clear expectation setting, and setting them up for success, whether it's financial coaching, housing navigation, other areas of supportive self-sufficiency. And then at the program level, how do you start thinking through this? Like, what are areas that we can strengthen as an agency and systems locally? And a lot of that comes down to those landlord engagement, partnership models, housing forums, and then nationally, right? How RHS is here and able to kind of expand some of that capacity and scale, and what might be available to you all. So the next 3 slides kind of dives deeper into those 3 areas of focus with some practical applications, right? And so case manager, it's really critical from what we've seen is that this individual really understands your local housing market. Housing is very localized, and having folks on the ground that are able to be intentional, make housing connections, they're the point of contact, and then they're providing some of that supportive care, whether it's through financial coaching, employment, health services, right? And there's more on here on the slide as well. Secondly, and the next kind of program level strategies and engagement, we've seen developing, right, like housing standard operating procedures for your department, leading staff training on housing services, really landlord outreach, and having some of those kind of cheerleaders of landlords that have a really strong positive experience, and how much that impacts bringing other landlords on board. And so one example that we've done at RHS is we've really just asked like, hey, if you've had a really positive experience, could you give us a testimonial? And that has proven really valuable as we do some outreach to other landlords and property managers. So if all tech works, we're going to do just a 20-second video of this testimonial that was actually out of the Bay Area.
Hi, my name is Brooks Baskin from To Be Living Property Management. I just wanted to give a quick testimonial here for our fantastic experience helping house Afghan refugees who are resettling to the Bay Area. We've now rented to a number of tenants, families, individuals, groups, and have had a great experience across the board. Really good tenants, good part of the rental communities, pay rent on time. So as a property manager or landlord, I could not more highly recommend working with these groups, both from a humanitarian perspective, but also that it is just good business.
Yeah, so that is one example, and it's on our website, right? So if it's valuable, feel free to share that, right? So our content is really made to be a one-stop shop for folks as you think through increasing access and attaining affordable housing for refugees, OR eligible populations, and other newcomers. And so on the next slide, just some practical public and organizational partners, private partners, and community partners. We would recommend that if you don't know folks in this space, highly recommend getting involved with your local continuum of care, fair housing organizations, local housing authority, right? All of these folks really, you would want a seat at the table, hopefully, so that you would be able to really ensure when in need of housing, you have some of those connections and partnerships. So we're going to skip over to the next slide as it relates to agency level national tools and how to kind of best practices on building that capacity and furthering upon some of that program level. It would be really broadening some housing outreach efforts, deepening housing expertise, creating some housing program development innovations, data informed programming. We have a housing hub and directory, which I'll go into a bit more detail, but it's this curated map of localized resources across the country. And then considering opportunities like strengthening agency capacity, whether it's through becoming, as an example, a HUD housing counseling agency, which could enable opportunities to HUD housing counseling funding opportunities, right? So there's a lot of different ways that if this is a space where you're like, yes, I want to really build our local capacity, what are some other spaces that we could start to think through strategically? So on these next few slides, I wanted to give this one is just a quick high level, like local engagement and practice. We have a lot of this kind of content available to you all through Refugee Housing Solutions. This is an example of a low-income housing tax credit and how this might be a partnership that folks could be interested in as it could potentially expand economic or affordable housing opportunities. And so we have an entire kind of playbook toolkit on this case study that is live for you all. But perhaps what I'll focus on the next slide is just, okay, so now what, right? I've given you all this information. It's a 90-minute seminar. Like, what do I do with this? And I wanted to offer just some types of support via Refugee Housing Solutions through our Housing Hub and Directory, our 240 plus resources that we have online. We have various learning opportunities, whether it's a virtual live course or an e-learning course that you can kind of take at your own time, and then innovations and partnerships. So diving into each of those sectors, we've also made a good deal of progress thus far since our launch and into this year. And so those are, the next slide just kind of gives some high level data points, but we won't focus drastically on that other than just that we are in a lot of places and we are continuously evaluating efficiency, effectiveness, and wanting to hear from folks, right? And so we have a lot of feedback mechanisms out there to where we want to ensure that what we're creating actually makes good sense and is relevant to local communities. So this next slide is really one of our flagship projects. It's the Housing Hub and Directory, and a lot of this was based early on some of our existing partnerships with state refugee coordinators, our needs assessments, our technical assistance, some of the trends that kept coming up. And it became really clear that folks were going to a lot of different spaces to find local resources. It was taking a lot of time. And if we could just like have a map that they're able to, it's somewhat interactive and an online platform that gives like educational tools, local resources within their community. And since our launch, we're now in all 50 states and we're expanding to different counties and jurisdictions. But it also has opportunity for crowdsourcing. And given the current climate we're in, resources are ever changing. And so our team is very regularly checking that resources are still relevant. And we also accept feedback, as I mentioned, from some of our stakeholders or partners that say, hey, you can go to the next slide. But they may mention like, hey, this resource is out of date. There's some new resources. We'd love to see this expanded in a different metro area or perhaps a new service category drop down. So this is just kind of a screen grab of what our housing directory looks like. I believe I don't have the chat open, but my colleagues are probably dropping in some links to the housing hub and directory, as it's just really proven to be valuable, and we're continuing to innovate and adapt it as relevant. So we're going to move to the next few slides. I know it's a lot of information, but I believe you'll get some of this content as well. But this is just a slide to kind of show if you want to submit resources. We have QR codes, really simple, easy ways to kind of reduce any kind of entry issues with being able to get content online. And then the next the slide deck just kind of shows a snapshot of the 240 different resources that we have available, and like how to recruit and retain housing providers, right? And so landlord relationships, some FAQs that you could perhaps provide to landlords who maybe haven't historically worked with newcomers, so really helpful content online as well. And then there's a lot of ways, as I mentioned, for folks to get involved. And so the next slide just shows some learning opportunities. We have a housing expertise and HUD housing counseling exam prep course that is led by one of my wonderful colleagues on the line, Jeremy, who will also be answering during some of the live Q&A section. But our next cohort starts in May. So make sure to register by May 19th. It's 100% free and online. But it is a live class that really just, in what we've received from feedback is it really improves some housing knowledge and understanding of the process and helps folks prepare if they're interested in eventually taking the HUD housing counseling exam. So the next slide is just, some feedback that we've received from recent cohorts. But finally, I thought it might be helpful to just end on some innovation and where do we go from here? So we have a variety of innovative partnerships, pilots that we are really evaluating of what makes sense to scale, what doesn't, best practice toolkits. One of our projects that we're really excited about that we piloted starting in March 2025 was the Trusted Housing Partners project, which was really aimed at bridging the gap between housing providers and the housing needs of OR eligible populations. And so on the next couple slides, we'll just kind of show a snapshot of why we created this, what it is, and the impact, which was really, as you can see here on the slide, of reducing that friction and attaining affordable housing, how we can support landlords and improve tenant housing navigation, and then the impact. Since we launched in May 2025 to March 2026, we've had through about 38 plus landlords and property managers that engaged, representing about 2,500 plus affordable housing units unlocked. And so really what this is building partnerships. We, with their permission, are able to kind of upload them on our housing hub and directory and kind of unlock some opportunities for folks to be exploring and connecting with landlords who perhaps would be interested in renting to newcomers, and then they kind of sync and go from there. But we're really excited about this. My colleagues can share more about it if you have questions, but where we're headed with this is really thinking through how do we move from pilot to operating model, because we've seen a lot of interest in a project kind of specifically tailored towards supporting those landlords and property management and tenant relationships. And so the final things I'll end on is there's a lot of innovations in progress right now. We're in our fourth year. We're thinking through like tech-enabled solutions. How do we preserve and expand affordable housing? How do we leverage university and faith partners, right? And there's ways to get involved, and we welcome your involvement. So finally, just these should be when the slide deck goes out, hyperlinks that you can kind of click on. But we really do believe in the power of collaboration and coordination and just working together as we think through these really complex challenges and simultaneously opportunities to really start working together to solve some of these housing stability challenges, both locally and nationally, and how we might get more folks housed. So that is all that I have for today. I will hand it over to Carissa and folks in California, but my team will stay on. I may have to hop off, but I have a team that will be able to stay on and answer some live Q&A. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Lindsay, for walking us through all of that and highlighting the resources of the refugee housing solutions. There's so many different things like the hub, the online resources, I love the dedicated resources for landlords and also the learning opportunities for the HUD certification. So I just wanted to shout those out again, and we'll be sharing all the links and everything for refugee housing solutions after this webinar as well. So thank you, Lindsay, for going through all of that. And before I hand it over and introduce also our next guest speakers, I have a quick poll that I would love to get us started with. So Megan, if you can launch poll number 6. Oops. There we go. Okay, it should be two questions. One is, how confident do you feel navigating housing systems in your county? So we just talked about a lot of like national things. Now we're going to go a little bit closer to California and our individual counties. So how confident do we feel about navigating housing in our counties? And 5 being most confident, 0 being not confident. And then the second question is about the average price for a 2-bedroom unit in your area. We have about almost 40% of you have responded, about 30 more seconds. We're seeing that people feel mainly kind of in the middle, like a level 3 on confidence right now. We still have some people who are rating 5, would love to see that, and definitely understand rating it a 0 sometimes. Again, this is not linear. Okay. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. Megan, you can end that one. Okay. Thank you so much. Okay. I am going to introduce our next guest speakers. So I am so excited to introduce people you probably and hopefully already know, some colleagues from the Refugee Programs Bureau. We're joined by Naz and Annalie, who both bring deep experience in the housing work across California. Naz serves as the state refugee housing coordinator and also leads statewide efforts around housing strategy, technical assistance, and program quality. So she's bringing a lot of strong systems level perspective. I will say that Naz, her voice is going away, so everyone give her thumbs up when she starts speaking, so she feels that encouragement from all of you. And then we also have Annalie here with us today. She manages housing programs with RPB, working closely with the counties and providers to deliver that housing and utility assistance, bringing a really valuable on the ground perspective from her experience in direct services. So together, they're going to walk us through the California housing context, available supports, and how providers can engage with RPB. So I'll turn it over to you, Naz and Annalie.
Thanks so much, Carissa. And yes, apologies, everyone. I'm kind of losing my voice and a little bit under the weather, but I'm going to try to power through this. As Carissa mentioned, my name is Nazia Ali, or Naz. I have the privilege of serving as California's first state refugee housing coordinator, and wanted to share a little bit of information about housing programs within RPB, which are relatively new for the state. Our first formal housing support program was developed in 2021, 2022, with an implementation beginning in 2022. Building that program from the ground up was both complex and fast paced, but we were fortunate to collaborate with national and local housing experts, especially during the Afghan crisis and Operation Allies Welcome, which helped us learn and adapt quickly. And we'll share more information about that effort later in the presentation. But since then, it has been quite a whirlwind. Building on that initial program, RPB has launched 2 additional housing initiatives, and we're excited to share more about all of them with you here today. Next slide, please. So we wanted to begin by setting the stage with some context about California's current housing landscape, as it helps explain many of the challenges refugees are facing today. California continues to face a severe housing crisis. I know that's no surprise to anyone here, categorized by high rents, extremely low vacancy rates, and a shortage of affordable units statewide. While this impacts many communities, newly arriving refugees are disproportionately affected. Families often arrive with limited income, no established credit history, and an immediate need for housing, placing them at a disadvantage from the outset. We also know that securing safe, stable, and affordable housing is one of the most significant barriers to long-term stability for refugee families. Housing is the foundation of the entire resettlement process, in my opinion. Without a permanent address, individuals face challenges establishing residency, accessing employment services, receiving public benefits, and enrolling their children into school. At the same time, California has experienced a notable increase in refugee arrivals. According to our own Refugee Programs Bureau data, the state has welcomed over 146,000 individuals since 2021. By comparison, total arrivals from 2017 to 2020 were over 82,000, close to 83,000, representing a 77% increase over an 8-year period. Taken together, these factors underscore why addressing housing access for refugee families is not only urgent, but essential to ensuring they can successfully transition, integrate, and thrive in their new communities. Next slide, please. To help illustrate the scale of housing costs in California, we reviewed multiple data sources indicating that the average rent for a 2-bedroom apartment is approximately $2,620 statewide. That's an apartment. Costs are even higher in major metropolitan areas such as Los Angeles, Sacramento, and San Diego, the same regions that have received some of the highest numbers of refugee arrivals. In many of these areas, average rents far exceed what newly arrived families can realistically afford. While lower cost options may exist in certain neighborhoods, those units are often located in areas that may not provide the safety, stability, or supportive environment families need as they rebuild their lives. Taken together, these housing realities create significant barriers for refugees as they navigate the resettlement process and work toward long-term stability. Next slide. Thank you. Furthermore, according to California's state-mandated regional housing needs assessment, the state is currently short between 2.5 million and 3.5 million housing units. This gap highlights the scale of the statewide housing shortage and helps explain why rents continue to rise and available units remain limited, especially for newly arrived refugees with limited income and no rental history. Current production levels further underscore this challenge. Based on recent permitting data from 2022 through 2024, California is building approximately 100 to 120,000 new units each year. While this reflects progress compared to the roughly 80,000 units produced annually over the past decade, it still falls significantly short of the estimated 180 to 220,000 units needed each year to meet state housing goals. In other words, even with increased production, the state continues to face a substantial shortfall. Our own housing data reflects the direct impact of this gap. Over 9,000 refugee households required housing assistance, underscoring how a statewide issue translates into immediate, day-to-day challenges for the communities we serve. Together, these figures demonstrate that addressing the housing shortage is not only a statewide priority, but also a critical component of supporting successful refugee resettlement here in our state. Next slide, please. Given the severe shortage of affordable housing in California and persistently high rental costs, it is important to consider how these conditions intersect with the income levels of newly arrived refugees. When housing costs are compared to typical early earnings, the affordability gap becomes even more apparent. In California, a household needs to earn approximately $120,000 annually to live comfortably. In contrast, newly arrived refugees often begin their resettlement journey earning entry-level wages or relying on short-term public benefits, income levels that fall well below what is needed to afford housing in the state. As of March 2026, the average annual income for a refugee in California is approximately $40,156, or about $19.31 per hour. Most individuals earn between a little over 28,000 and 45,400 a year, with only a small percentage earning above 61,000 a year. Even at the higher end of this range, wages remain insufficient to meet the cost of a typical rental unit here in the state. This challenge is further compounded by the time it can take to secure initial employment. As we all know, many refugees spend weeks or months searching for their first job, increasing their reliance on housing assistance during this critical period. Our data reflects this reality, with more than 9,200 refugees households requiring housing support, highlighting the significant mismatch between early income and actual housing costs. Taken together, these factors make clear that refugee families face a substantial affordability gap from the moment they arrive, one that makes independent rent payments extremely difficult without targeted housing support during their first months and years in California. Next slide. So far, we've outlined how high rents, limited housing supply, and low starting wages create a significant affordability gap for newly arrived refugees. Beyond these financial challenges, however, refugees also face a range of unique barriers that make finding and securing housing even more difficult. These factors compound the economic gap and further limit the options available to families. So, for one, limited or no credit history. Most landlords require a credit check as part of the application process. Refugees typically arrive in the United States without an established credit history, making it difficult to qualify for rentals. And while a cosigner can sometimes help, this is not always a viable option, particularly for those without established networks or whose family and friends may be in similar situations. Then there's language barriers. Navigating rental applications, understanding lease agreements, and communicating with landlords can be challenging for individuals with limited English proficiency or literacy. Some landlords may be hesitant to rent to newcomers due to perceived discrimination and bias, perceived concerns related to immigration status, language, or cultural and religious differences. We're seeing large or multi-generational households. Many refugee families have larger household structures, which can make it more difficult to find housing that is both appropriately sized and affordable. With documentation requirements, securing housing often requires specific documentation, such as identification. Excuse me, I had to pause to cough a little bit. Um, Such as identification, income verification, or rental history, which may not be readily available for newly arrived refugees. There is sometimes a geographic mismatch. More affordable housing options are often located far from employment opportunities, schools, and established community networks, creating additional barriers to stability and integration. There's trauma and adjustment needs. Experiences of displacement, instability, and trauma can also impact a family's sense of safety and stability, making the process of securing and maintaining housing more complex. Together, these barriers illustrate that the challenges refugees face in accessing housing extend well beyond affordability alone, require thoughtful, targeted approaches to support successful resettlement. Next slide, and I'm going to pass it on to Annalie. Thanks for being patient with my voice.
Thank you, Naz, and thank you for hanging in there. So in response to both the rise in refugee arrivals and increasing difficulty to secure housing, the Refugee Programs Bureau, or RPB, has developed a set of housing programs designed to bridge these gaps and provide targeted support during the critical early stages of resettlement. So today we're going to review the 3 RPB housing programs currently operating in California and share how they address these challenges. Next slide. Okay, so the RPB currently provides assistance through 3 key housing programs: the Afghan Support and Investment Program, or ASIP, the Housing Assistance for Ukrainians Program, or HAU, and the Refugee Housing Support Program, or RHSP. In just a moment, we're going to walk through each of these programs in more detail, but we wanted to highlight a few important updates first. So 2 of these programs, ASIP and HAU, are scheduled to wind down later this year. The final month for rental assistance through ASIP will be June 2026, and for HAU, it will be August 2026. Both programs will fully sunset on September 30th, 2026. And you may also notice that ASIP and HAU are grayed out on the slide, and that's because both programs officially stopped accepting new applications in December 2025, leaving RHSP the only program currently enrolling new applicants. Next slide. The first program we're going to review is the Afghan Support and Investment Program, which we commonly refer to as ASIP. So ASIP was developed from an acute need to support Afghan newcomers to California in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in July 2021. Approximately 41,000 Afghan newcomers were resettled into California, and as a result, we were in dire need of housing support. ASIP was meant to serve as a lifeline to many vulnerable Afghan households by providing long-term housing support so that they could work towards self-sufficiency. The program began with the support of 2 regional nonprofit service providers, but then shifted to one statewide administrative model, with Catholic Charities Diocese of San Diego, or CCDSD, becoming the lead ASIP administrator beginning January 1, 2023. And we're proud to share that since program inception in 2022, ASIP has served over 27,441 individuals, or approximately 5,600 households in need of housing support, which represents about 66% of the total Afghan population resettled in California. This assistance has helped families stabilize their lives and begin building a path toward greater self-sufficiency. Next slide. More specifically, ASIP provides direct housing support to eligible Afghan households. Those services include scaled rental assistance up to the full amount for up to 12 months, utility assistance, and initial security deposit assistance up to the full amount. Scaled assistance means that the rental assistance amount will typically start to lessen down as the client progresses towards the end of their 12 months. And the idea here is that we want to support the client's path towards self-sufficiency and know that they can take on the full amount of paying their rent once they exit from the program. And we want to emphasize that the funding for ASIP was limited, and because of that, our goal was to prioritize assistance to those who were most vulnerable and at risk of eviction or losing their housing. That vulnerability is determined based on a variety of household attributes that we take into consideration during the application process. And Again, as I mentioned earlier, ASIP will distribute final housing assistance in June 2026 and will sunset indefinitely on September 30th, 2026. Next slide. So next, we'll review the Housing Assistance for Ukrainians program, otherwise known as HAU. HAU was developed from an acute need to support Ukrainian newcomers to California during the escalation of the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war in 2022. The goal of the HAU program is to provide a financial lifeline for Ukrainian newcomers whose U4U program sponsor has withdrawn support, preventing housing loss and addressing housing insecurity through a statewide effort to guide new Ukrainian arrivals toward permanent and sustainable housing. The RPB implemented the HAU program under a hybrid administration model with the 8 refugee impacted counties. And for those folks who aren't familiar with those 8, which 8 counties those are, that's Alameda, Los Angeles, Orange, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and Stanislaus. They administer the program in their respective counties, and then Catholic Charities Diocese of San Diego, CCDSD, manages HAU for the remaining 50 non-impacted counties across California. And we're proud to share that since program inception, HAU has served 2,900 households in need of housing support in California. Next slide. Okay, so originally, HAU provided 6 months of rental and utility assistance covering up to 50% of the monthly cost with a maximum benefit of $10,000 over the entire program duration. However, as of April 1st, 2026, so just this month, the RPB expanded HAU program guidance in Refugee Coordinator Letter 26-02, which allows program administrators to cover up to 100% of monthly rental and utility assistance to eligible current and previous HAU clients. The maximum benefit of $10,000 and 6-month cap have both been removed to provide greater assistance to eligible Ukrainian families that are still in need of housing support. So to reiterate, HAU is no longer accepting new applications as of December 2025. So expanded program services will only apply to current and previous clients of HAU. And counties will reach out to potentially eligible previous clients before housing assistance ends in August 2026. And as a reminder, unfortunately, HAU will sunset indefinitely on September 30th, 2026. Next slide. All right, lastly, we have the Refugee Housing Support Program, also known as RHSP, which was developed after expanded policy guidance was released from the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which is commonly referred to as ORR, which allows refugee support services base funds to be used for time-limited housing assistance to all ORR eligible individuals. This updated guidance was in response to the increasing numbers of arrivals to the US within a short time frame. So the RPB originally designed RHSP to provide direct housing and utility assistance to eligible households who would not have otherwise been able to receive housing support through ASIP or HAU. In addition to increased newcomer arrivals from Afghanistan and Ukraine, there was also an uptick in mass migration to the US from communities like Cuban Haitians, Syrians, and Venezuelans, to name a few, who are also fleeing their home countries due to fear of persecution or other migration pull factors. So once ORR expanded its funding policies to include housing support, we knew we wanted to create a housing program for those communities who were also in dire need of housing support. So RHSP is administered and only available in the 8 refugee impacted counties of Alameda, Los Angeles, Orange, Sacramento, San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Clara, and Stanislaus. And because each county has the autonomy to administer the RHSP program in accordance to their own county policies, there may be some slight differences in how RHSP can be accessed and how program services are delivered. And to date, we're happy to share that the program has served 595 households or 1,321 individuals through the program. Next slide. So RHSP provides rental and utility assistance and initial security deposit assistance to ORR eligible households. So assistance is provided for up to 12 months, covering up to 100% of rental and utility costs. The initial security deposit is also covered up to the full amount. And the program also provides light touch case management to support with housing related needs. So with ACIP and HAU coming to an end, RPB expanded program guidance on December 31st, 2025 to make RHSP available to all ORR eligible applicants who meet the updated eligibility criteria with the goal of providing a critical resource to newcomers in California. And with that, I'll pass it back to Naz.
Thank you. Here's a comparison of RPB's 3 refugee housing support programs. As you can see, each program takes a slightly different approach to rental assistance. RHSP provides up to 100% rental assistance for up to 12 months. And as Annalie mentioned, ACIP offers a scaled rental subsidy over a 12-month period, while HAU historically provided up to 50% assistance for a maximum of 6 months. As mentioned earlier, HAU has since been expanded to allow up to 100% assistance through August 2026. A key factor influencing these differences is funding. Congress authorized 2 separate funding streams for ACIP and HAU, but the levels varied significantly, with ACIP receiving substantially more funding. Both of these funding sources were also time limited. In contrast, RHSP has historically been supported through a more consistent, renewable funding stream, allowing for greater stability in program design. All 3 programs serve serve populations eligible under ORR guidelines. However, ACIP and HAU were shaped by congressional appropriations that were specifically designated for Afghan and Ukrainian populations. With the expansion of ORR funding policies, RPB was able to establish RHSP to serve the broader range of ORR eligible populations not covered under those targeted funding streams. Another key distinction across the programs is how they are administered. These approaches were largely driven by funding requirements. So for RHSP, funding is administered through 8 refugee-impacted counties. And while RPB provides overarching policy guidance, counties must also operate within their own local policies, which can result in a variation in program implementation across jurisdictions. In contrast, ACIP funding was distributed through a grant agreement and request for proposal process, allowing RPB to partner directly with a nonprofit administrator, CCDSD. This centralized model enabled quicker policy adjustments and more streamlined coordination. HAU represents a hybrid approach. Funding flows to the 8 refugee-impacted counties, similar to RHSP, but those counties were able to select an administrator to operate the program across the 15 non-impacted counties. Through the implementation of these 3 programs, RPB has gained valuable insights into the benefits, challenges, and key considerations of different program models. Lessons we'll share in the next slides. Next slide, please. So overall, RPB's housing programs provide essential rental support, supportive services, and pathways to long-term stability for eligible newcomers. The benefits of these programs include rental assistance. So across ACIP, HAU, and RHSP, clients consistently express deep appreciation for the rental support they receive. In a state where high housing costs pose challenges for many Californians, especially newcomers, these programs serve as a critical lifeline. And in many cases, they have helped prevent eviction and homelessness. There's also supportive services. Beyond financial assistance, the programs offer light touch case management, helping clients navigate available resources, connect to employment, healthcare, and education services. With stability and independence, by alleviating the immediate burden of rental costs, RPB's housing programs enable clients to focus on securing employment, supporting their families, and addressing other resettlement needs. The stability creates a strong foundation for long-term self-sufficiency. Another benefit is community partnerships. These programs are delivered through trusted local organizations, including refugee-led and community-based partners, as well as state and county agencies. These partnerships foster trust and strengthen community investment and program success. And then culturally responsive support. Program materials are provided in the primary languages of the population served, and partners prioritize hiring staff who reflect the communities they support. This ensures services are accessible, culturally relevant, and welcoming to all eligible participants. Next slide. We have also experienced a number of challenges in delivering these housing programs and have learned the following. The high rent costs in programs like ASIP and HEU, limited or scaled funding does not always keep pace with rapidly increasing rents, reducing the overall impact of the assistance provided. Another challenge would be landlord participation. RPB programs prioritize direct payments to landlords to avoid negatively affecting clients' eligibility for other public benefits. However, some landlords are hesitant to participate for a variety of reasons. As a result, some clients feel they must weigh the trade-offs of accepting assistance and in certain cases may choose not to participate at all. Short-term funding. Many programs rely on time-limited or uncertain federal and state funding streams, creating challenges for long-term sustainability. Both ASIP and HEU, for example, are currently set to sunset in 2026. There's a capacity strain. Community-based organizations often face staffing and resource constraints, particularly during periods of increased refugee arrivals or shifts in federal funding. This can make it difficult to predict and maintain adequate staffing levels. There's always the complex needs of families. Newcomers may require more intensive case management, including language access and culturally responsive services, which can place additional strain on program capacity. Additionally, many refugees arrive with significant medical conditions and needs, adding an additional layer of complexity. And then there's geographic barriers. Affordable housing options are often located far from employment opportunities, perhaps schools, and established refugee communities, creating additional challenges for access and long-term stability. Next slide. California's refugee housing programs are innovative, though, because they integrate financial assistance with supportive services, scale support to promote self-sufficiency, leverage culturally competent partners, and prioritize long-term housing stability over short-term fixes, such as with integration of housing with supportive services. Rather than providing rental assistance in isolation, California connects housing support with employment services, language access, and case management. This holistic model recognizes that housing stability is closely tied to broader factors, ensuring that refugees are supported not only in securing housing, but also in successfully rebuilding their lives and thriving in their new communities. There's scaled support. Programs may require or encourage refugees to contribute a small affordable portion of rent that gradually increases over time. And the structured approaches helps families develop budgeting skills, strengthens financial independence, and reduces long-term reliance on public assistance. There's partnerships with community-based organizations. California intentionally partners with refugee-led and community-based organizations that have deep cultural, linguistic, and trauma-informed expertise. This decentralized, community-driven model strengthens trust, improves access to services, and leads to better outcomes for refugee families. There's a focus on long-term stability. Beyond just the initial resettlement, California's housing programs are designed to prevent homelessness and promote sustained housing security. By prioritizing permanent housing solutions over emergency or transitional options, the state addresses the root causes of housing instability. And then equity and cultural responsiveness. Programs incorporate cultural brokers, translated materials, and refugee peer navigators to ensure accessibility. These practices make housing services more equitable and responsive to the diverse needs of our refugee communities. Next slide, and I'll pass it back to Anna.
All right. Thank you, Naz. So two of the key housing programs that we discussed earlier will end in 2026, which will significantly reduce the support options available to refugee households. So at the same time, cuts to other public benefit programs have increased the strain on newcomers, making it even harder for families to stay housed and stable. While overall resources are becoming more limited, we still want to highlight the supports that remain available to refugees in California. Each of our housing program websites includes a resource page that lists both general services and housing specific supports that the RPB is aware of and can help direct clients to. Some of the resources are state funded programs like CalWorks, county resources, and online directories from other housing partners like Refugee Housing Solutions. And we're going to drop those links in the chat. This transition to fewer funding sources underscores the importance of maximizing the resources we still have and strengthening partnerships with community organizations, counties, and other stakeholders to help fill the gaps these expiring programs will leave behind. So we'll be dropping those links to those resources pages in the chat. Again, those are the resources that we're aware of that may be able to support. Next slide. And we also wanted to share a few ways you can engage with RPB. As we mentioned earlier, helping newcomers achieve self-sufficiency in California will take a strong and collective partnership. So here's some ways you can connect with us. Firstly, we encourage ongoing feedback from partners and staff so we can continue improving our tools, trainings, and housing supports to better meet the needs of the communities we serve. Please feel free to reach out to our RPB general inbox or to any of our housing program specific inboxes to share any feedback on our housing programs. And we'll be dropping those as well in the chat. RPB also offers triage case support for complex or urgent housing situations. This allows caseworkers to quickly problem solve barriers and identify feasible next steps for clients facing immediate challenges. Again, if you have a case that may need our support, you can reach out to any of those email addresses that we're going to drop in the chat. Lastly, we provide technical assistance, offering guidance on housing processes, available resources, and other programs and services through RPB, and best practices to strengthen your capacity to effectively support refugee households. And with that, I'll pass it back to Carissa.
Great. Thank you so much, Annalie and Naz, for walking us through all of that and sharing about the resources and more. Right now, we have time for live questions. I know that we've been having some questions answered throughout the presentation, but if you have questions that you would love for Annalie and Naz from RPB or the team from RHS, we have Grace and Jeremy still on the call with us, then feel free to go ahead and put them in the chat, and we have time for people to get their questions answered live. And Megan, if you see one of the questions come in the chat for me, if you will say it out loud if we need to do it live. And if not, I do have some questions that were submitted ahead of time too, but want to save time for live questions right now.
Carissa, I could take a stab at answering Claire's question
Okay,
in the Q&A.
great.
So if former ASIP and HU clients are not eligible to receive RHSP, who will be eligible for RHSP? There aren't many refugees entering lately. That's 100% true, Claire. Refugee arrivals have dwindled down, although they are mostly South Afrikaners that are coming to California. So those folks are eligible for RHSP. But we have also seen some new enrollments from folks from different countries as well, accessing RHSP. And that's because I wanted to basically highlight a pretty important policy requirement for RHSP. Folks need to access it within their first 12 months of ORR eligibility. So if somebody arrived, let's say, okay, so today's April 16th, if somebody arrived May 1st, 2020, okay, fine. That's a little bit too close, but well, let's just say if somebody arrived in May 1st, 2025, they have 12 months to access RHSP. There's a 12-month window that you have to access, that you have available to you to access it. After that 12-month window, it expires, and unfortunately, you can't apply for RHSP at that point. So there are some folks who arrived in 2025 who have been able to access RHSP and are getting those services. So if you know anyone who may be eligible, check out the website. We have an applicant fact sheet on there that kind of details a little bit more about the eligibility requirements. And then if they're in one of those impacted counties, feel free to refer them to the CRC in that county. Yeah, thank you. That's a good question.
Thanks, Annalie.
And
Other
then,
questions? Oh, go ahead.
sorry,
Yeah,
I
love it.
wanted
Go ahead.
I wanted to just kind of highlight a question we got earlier from David. It's a really important one because the housing programs that we're talking about, ASIP, HAU, RHSP, those were all open to populations that were ORR eligible. So because the funding that came to us was federal government funding, the policy that the eligibility came with that as well. And so that's why those resources are only available to folks with legal statuses like refugees, asylees, special immigrant visa holders. We understand that that excludes folks who are asylum seekers. And we know that they often they're very, very limited resources available to them. Most of the time, you're going to find those resources available locally through like rapid response networks. So for folks who might be supporting those folks, I would say look within your local community to see if there's any nonprofits or service providers that might be organizing and coordinating efforts to support those folks.
Thanks, Annalie. Okay, I had a great question that was submitted ahead of time that um, Grace and Jeremy would be great if you could give your some insight. Somebody said, so as we have newcomers coming into the community, obviously there's a lot of learning that needs to happen just for anybody who goes into a new community as well. But the landlord tenant laws, leases, inspections, deposits, um, local expectations on just like what it means to live in an apartment or a new house or all those things. So that can often be a big barrier for long-term stability in housing for newcomers. So somebody asked, how can community-based organizations support clients in navigating these expectations and maintaining those good relationships with their landlords? So Grace or Jeremy, if you have any thoughts on that, I think that would be a great question for us to highlight.
Yeah, I can hop in there. This is definitely a very common issue, right? With new people coming in, the culture is different, the laws are different, the structure of what the houses are made out of are different, right? So, I mean, the main thing, and I've gotten this. I think I just talked to a magistrate district judge this weekend, and he talked about issues happening like after case management, right? Folks get into problems with the landlords, we get into financial issues, and they don't have that case management there anymore to back them up. So I think the best thing that organizations like CBOs can do is just walk with their clients throughout that entire tenancy as long as they can, and talk about things like general maintenance, proper use of the facilities like the plumbing or the lights, even help directly when landlord issues come up, either talking with the landlord directly or helping the tenant follow up and go through with the landlord. Like this person is not just yelling at you, you need to talk with them and discuss things with them. And then by being knowledgeable in federal fair housing law, local fair housing laws, state and local tenant landlord laws themselves, CBOs can better help their clients even through those tough situations with landlords when they do come up. Um, I've been issues where the downstairs tenant is calling the landlord on their upstairs neighbor because there's kids and they're loud, right? Um, and they're filing for eviction against that person now because they have three noise complaints within a year. But just because kids are on the second floor is not a reason for eviction. So being able to knowing what those laws state can help CBOs better assist their clients and then pass that information on to their clients multiple times. Basic housing maintenance things, sweeping, vacuuming, cleaning, more than once, more than one person telling them, right, is what helps make that tenancy successful.
Great. Thank you, Jeremy, so much. And I love the resources that is putting in the chat right now. I know when I was a case manager, this was a big part of discussions that I would have on a regular basis. And, it's just important um, for everyone to be learning about how to be a good neighbor when you're living in community spaces. Because it's just there, it's good to be community minded. So I appreciate you putting those in the chat, Grace. Any other live questions coming through? If not, I have one more question from my end. Okay. Well, maybe we
So
can
I
get
can
two
just
questions. Oh, go
mention
ahead. Yeah.
um, there is, I just kind of maybe in general, what we can do after the webinar, once we send out these materials, we can also
Hmm.
send out like those resources, web pages, and then links to those, and then any other resources we might be aware of, not just through the Refugee Programs Bureau, but through the Immigration Integration Branch that has other resources as well that supports newcomers.
Awesome. Great. I would love that. We would love to send that out to everyone too. So we will definitely be sending a lot of resources out. And obviously, a lot on ongoing resource will be Refugee Housing Solutions Hub as well. So I see somebody with their hand up, Almaz. If you would like to ask a question, you should be able to come off mute. If not, I will try to, or yeah.
Hi, my name is Almas. I'm the founder and executive director of Global Communication, Education, and Art. We are located in Auckland, but we serve a lot of people in the Bay Area. This presentation was impressive because this is the first time that I'm attending for housing, solutions with the refugee program. Um, so we have all these problems with our immigrant population because we serve mainly the African immigrant population, but we also have a lot of the Latinos and other immigrants, like Venezuela, El Salvador, Guatemala, and all this. When it comes to legal services and then also housing issues, we also partner with the Refugee and Immigrant Forum in the Bay Area. And then, so housing is major problem for our community. It's not only for refugee, but also for, asylees are the worst because they don't have no documentations. So everything that presentation I've been watching from the beginning to the end is really impressive. But so for us, like we trying to we had a shelter during the pandemic. The shelter location was donated from the community church. So we was sheltering people during the pandemic in that area, directly bringing people from detention. So we sheltered them over there, and then we slowly, move them to uh, transitional housing, and then from there, like they can be help them, like giving them wraparound services, then they can be stable. So from that, like and then we trying to find housing like for low income, affordable housing and all rental housing. It was very difficult, and then we end up like renting houses under our organization, so rented under the organization, lease it, and then it's market price housing. And then we just let people live over there, like sharing rooms, like, so then, if we rent two-bedroom house, then four people can live over there, then share the rooms. And then we also find them like couch serving in the different areas. So right now, we have about 25 houses under the organization that we rent in the different areas. It's very much like, devastating situation for immigrants, you know.
Hmm.
So we had one person yesterday he came to the office. He have seven kids and he's living in two-bedroom house. And he's the
Hmm.
only provider that makes like, $3,000. And the rent is 2,500. So it's just like there's a lot of story like that is coming. So our solution for for our organization is we're trying to build like housing. We are working on housing development, like to have
Mm.
a center, African Resource Center, with 2 or 3 story housing that up to 200 houses on that area. So we just wanted to see like if there's any way that we can, have partnership or work with you, on housing development, because we don't know how to access resources or navigate like support services that when the development for the development strategy. So we wanted to see if we can partner with you as to solve these issues, and then we can move on with
Yeah,
our development plan.
yeah. Almost, thank you so much for sharing and also sharing some, you know, again, housing is not linear, so there's a lot of like on the ground figuring out creative practices. And I know that there have been other successful like development projects across the country as well. So we can also share some like maybe some resources from that. Um, we can also compile some things that might have already been used in other places, and I'll share that in the follow-up email. Any quick thoughts, as I know we're about to be out of time, any quick thoughts from any of our guest facilitators today to Almaz's question about like just obviously about the starting the process for like working in like development for housing solutions? Any quick thoughts before we wrap up?
I know that's a really big task, and I think that's also really important work that you're doing, Almaz. In my days as working for a service provider on the ground, we ran similar models to what you're doing, where you kind of rent out those spaces, and you realize like this is temporary, and this is great because we can at least house folks right now. But what can we do within our power to have more sustainable, permanent solutions? And I think in the experience I had, it was again more localized, where you work with like your county board of supervisors, you work with your city departments that focus on housing development, seeing if there's any funding support available through those avenues. It really does take a collaborative effort to kind of start those conversations. It probably may involve some of like donor stewardship to see how you can, I mean, if you're talking about like capital campaigns and stuff like that, it's just such a collaborative effort. But you may want to start locally with all of kind of how Lindsay alluded back to those different folks who you want to have a seat at the table, kind of starting there. And I would highly recommend starting with your county and city local officials to see, what funding or support they could provide with that effort.
Thank you, Annalie. And Almaz, we'll share a bunch of resources after this, and this is not the last time for this kind of conversation. Again, as we know, that housing is ongoing need and an ongoing development as well. So thank you for bringing up that question. And Annalie, thanks for giving your quick thoughts on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And as I know we are right at time, I just want to quickly go over some final things. We have our next webinar coming up in June on motivational interviewing. We recently had our first provider mixer yesterday in San Diego. We had almost 50 people attend, and it was incredible. So glad for everyone to join. We will be having another one in LA in May. And we'll be sending out more information about when they're coming to your county as well, but just wanted to highlight that that is in the works. And then finally, we'd love, as I mentioned at the beginning, we do these webinars based on your feedback. So please fill out the feedback survey. You can scan the QR code. I'll be sharing all the resources, a link to the webinar and to the slides as well. So all that will be coming straight to you. And again, I love to highlight our feedback survey as much as possible. So please scan the QR code and give us your thoughts. And we want to keep providing information and resources that are relevant and helpful to you every single day. And I just like to say one last thing about housing, because housing is not linear. Remember that there really are two kinds of wins in this work. It's like when a client gets housed, yes, that's a win. But also another win is when a client doesn't give up because of how they were supported. So the work that you're doing here today to inform yourself, to learn, to get inspired, to be encouraged, all those things, that is also a win for your client because you're getting the information that can support them as well. So just wanted to encourage you in that. And thank you again so much for joining us today. I'll follow up with all the great information in a few days and hope to see you on future trainings. Have a great rest of your day.